A Plaguelands Media production.
Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you another book review. Now, as you probably guessed from most of the videos on this channel, I'm a huge fan of fantasy literature. And, I mean, just look at the fucking piles of crap behind me. I've been a fan of fantasy literature for a long, long time. And back in the day, TSR, before they were bought out by Wizards of the Coast, were showcasing some fantastic authors with a lot of novels in their Dungeons and Dragons worlds, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, to a lesser extent, kind of Greyhawk, Mystara, blah, blah, blah. So I would buy these novels and just devour them, absolutely love them. That's no longer the case. It seems like Wizards of the Coast are hedging all their bets on just a very small stable of authors. We don't get the books that we used to, which is a real shame because a lot of authors would showcase, different parts of the Forgotten Realms, for example, different types of heroes, different gods and goddesses, and all this kind of thing. We just don't have that these days. But the book that I want to talk to you about, Finder's Bane, is an old Forgotten Realms novel that is actually the first in a trilogy. But it is a trilogy that is not connected to one another. The first book, Finder's Bane. The second book is Fist and Dantalus Reborn, which is set in the Dragonlance setting, not Forgotten Realms. And then the third book comes back to the Forgotten Realms with Timora's Luck. I have a lot to say about this, so we're just going to get straight into the next episode of... I'm going to say right off the bat, I really, really enjoyed this one. However, I think it's because I'm coming at this from more of a nostalgic viewpoint. I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit. So the premise of the story, Finder's Bane, is basically a priest of a new god, the god Finder Wervenspur, has been tasked with taking a journey to the Lost Vale, where a shrine to his god is kind of kept. He is recruited into the priesthood by an old priest called Jedediah that he met in the city of Burdusk. On his travels, he comes across a paladin of Lathander, Holly, who's being attacked by the Zentarum. He rescues her. She takes him to Daggerdale, where, a hidden vale in Daggerdale, where he meets the ruler, Randall Morn. He is ultimately betrayed by one of Randall Morn's bodyguards, captured by the priests of Zim or Vim. It's very difficult to pronounce the god's name. The god is basically the child of Bane. And Holly is also captured. They manage to escape with the help of a winged woman and a priestess of Bane. And they go on a journey to recover the Hand of Bane, which ultimately leads them across the realms and across the multiverse and everything. That's just summing up the story. Really kind of briefly. All in all, it's a good book. But this is pure 90s TSR fucking nostalgia. First of all, let's just start here, because I made a point of pointing this out in my David Gemmell Legend video. there's a map. There is a map. Now, why did I love this book so much, and what do I have to say about this book? First of all, this book is set in the Dale lands. Back in the day, Shadowdale was pretty much the center of Forgotten Realms adventures and whatnot, because Shadowdale was where the wizard Elminster resided in Forgotten Realms canon. Elminster being the most famous wizard of the Forgotten Realms, and a character who was played back in the day by Ed Greenwood, who was one of the creators of Forgotten Realms. For some reason, Wizards of the Coast have kind of shifted the focus to the Sword Coast with Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, Gauntled Grim, and all of that, which is fine, don't get me wrong. The Forgotten Realms is a rich and varied place with lots of different locations, but part of me does miss the good old days of the Dale lands. Awesome. You have villains in this book in the form of the Zentarum, who used to be the big bad organization that was kind of spreading across, and they are to some extent still a big bad organization in the Forgotten Realms, but just not what they once were. You've got effectively 3 evil gods here that are referenced, at least 4 if you include Moanda. I will get more into that a little bit later. But you've got Cyric, Zim, and Bane. Bane, of course, is a dead god. His son has taken over some of his portfolio, and Cyric, during the time of Troubles, took over his portfolio but went mad with power, so he's kind of considered a bit of a crazy or an insane god. That's cool. You have the ties to one of the greatest trilogies of novels that TSR ever put out, the Finder's Stone trilogy, which begins with Azure Bonds, The Werven Spur, and Song of the Sorials. Song of the Sorials is referenced a lot in this book because Song of the Sorials is where Finder gets his godlike powers by defeating Moanda in the Abyss. Moanda, of course, is the dead god that once held the domains of rot and decay. If you've read those previous books, there is so much in this one. You have the main character of Joel. Joel is pretty much, with the exception of Copperbloom the Sorial, which is from Song of the Sorials, which is the earlier book. Joel is really the first human priest of Finder. He's a bard that would constantly go against the teachings at the Bardic College, and this is what drew Finder's attention to him, because Finder is the god of changing or going against the establishment when it comes to arts, which puts him at odds with other gods like Ogma and Melil, I think is the goddess's name. Whatever. And Joel has doubts. He's just like anyone. He has doubts about his faith. Oftentimes when he gets into trouble, he doesn't actually use his priestly powers because he just forgets he has them. He still sees himself as a bard and not a priest. The character of Finder, spoiler alert, Jedediah is Finder. Pretty fucking obvious, but that's okay. Finder was a character that was introduced in Azure Bonds. He was a bard who was obsessed with having his music live on in some form. So he tried to create clones that could carry his music out to everyone. There was an accident, and one of his apprentices was killed, and another one was visibly scarred. And as punishment, he was trapped in a tower, and all recollection of him and his songs were wiped from everyone's mind. A little bit Spider-Man No Way Home-ish, but that's okay. This was way before that movie. And that's when we meet Elias, who is one of his clones, and Dragonbait, who is a Sauriel. Dragonbait, of course, can be found in the 5th edition campaign Tomb of Annihilation, where he is in Chult with Artus Simba, who is looking for his wife. Artus has the Ring of Winter, which is another novel in the Harper series. I'm not even going to fucking go there. It's a whole big thing. So Finder is a flawed god. He's a weak god. And yet he is going up against Bane. The whole point is that the essence of Bane needs to find the hand of Bane in order to be resurrected. So I thought that was really interesting how different priests, Welinda, the priestess of Bane, who is effectively a dead god, so they often wonder how can she get her spells if her god is dead. Welinda and Joel have a few kind of philosophical conversations about the meaning of faith to each of them, which I think is really, really interesting. All in all, pretty good. However, where this book rises above and beyond, in my opinion, is it doesn't just stick to the Forgotten Realms. We have aspects of Spelljammer in here with the character of Jas, who has her spelljamming ship taken by the priestess of Bane. Spelljammer was a setting which it's kind of Dungeons and Dragons in space, but without spaceships. It's still kind of magic, and you can fly between realms and earn planets and all this kind of stuff. Back in the day, I have to admit, I wasn't a fan of Spelljammer. I thought it sounded fucking stupid. Wizards of the Coast are bringing it back this year, and I am definitely going to be getting the boxed set. Just because I'm a fucking fanboy. So there you go. So you have elements of Spelljammer. They go to, and okay, Planescape was one of my all-time favorite settings in 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons. My 3rd edition campaign that I ran for my friends back in the day, back in the early 2000s, had them actually use the main city as the adventure hub, and then I sent them to the Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, and all those other places. Now, the main city, the spelling is Sigil, which, if you know your words, is Sigil. I have always called it Sigil because calling a city Sigil just sounds fucking stupid to me. So in this review, I'm going to continue calling it Sigil, and I know it's wrong, but I don't fucking care. They go to Sigil in this fucking book. They actually travel to the Outlands. They find themselves in the realm of Ilsensine, who's the Mind Flayer god. They actually meet up with the Mind Flayer god, which was awesome. They go to the Palace of Judgment, I believe it was called. One moment. Cat's Gate. Okay, let me just find the chapter heading. The Palace of Judgment, yes. Which is the place where the people of Kara-Tur go to be judged. Kara-Tur in the Forgotten Realms was the kind of the Asian setting, but Joel says a lot of these people look like the Tugan Horde, which was a reference to another trilogy of books by David Cook, Horse Lords, where the Tugan Horde was kind of like Genghis Khan attacking the nation of Cormyr, led by King Azaun IV, was the leader of Cormyr at the time. So they reference a lot of things that have happened in previous novel series that Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb didn't even write, which kind of creates a universe, like almost like the Marvel extended, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was awesome. Probably the greatest surprise in this book, the characters of Joel, Holly, and Jas, the winged Spelljammer woman, get trapped in a valley, and the Zentarum are closing in on them. They've escaped from the from being captives in the tower. The Zentarum are closing in on them, and Jedediah appears and causes a rock slide, which basically wipes out the army, or the patrol, I should say. And it uncovers a tomb. The tomb of Shraven. And Holly wants to investigate. And Jedediah says, don't investigate, we don't have time. We have to go. Send word to Randall Morn in Daggerdale, and he can send people to investigate. And so that's what she does, and then the story continues. Completely throwaway incident. Or is it? Back in 1995 or 1996, TSR released what was arguably, in my opinion, one of the best trilogies of second edition Dungeons & Dragons scenarios ever. The Sword of the Dales, The Secret of Spiderhaunt, The Return of Randall Morn. In these adventures, the players are tasked with finding Randall Morn, who has gone missing. They travel to Shraven's tomb, Shraven being a master weaponsmith who created a sword that would protect the Dale lands in times of need. They travel to Shraven's tomb, where they have discovered that Randall Morn was investigating Shraven's tomb, had been kidnapped. Randall Morn investigating Shraven's tomb because Holly sent him the location of that tomb and ultimately went off on her adventure. And in the meantime, in the interim, in the adventure, Randall Morn is kidnapped. Let me just bring up on my computer here, my trusty little computer, which is which I'm not seeing. Okay. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I was going to bring up the actual adventures here, but it'll take me too long to find them, so don't worry about it. Ultimately, this is happening at the same time that those three adventures are happening, where while Joel and Holly are going off to Planescape to find the Hand of Bane, your player characters in the campaign are searching for Randall Morn, who was a character in this book. I thought that was fucking awesome. I thought that was a really great little tie-in. The main villain of this book is what is known as a Bane Lich. A Bane Lich was actually a creature from the Forgotten Realms Monster Manual, or Monster Folio, as they were. It was loose leaf sleeves in a binder back in the day. The Bane Lich was a 17 hit dice creature, a priest of Bane, that was at least 17th level before they died. Bane turned them into a lich. They have a phylactery, all the things that come with liches, but they had extra powers, and every 400 years they would gain a new power, and they were like Bane's chosen. And the main villain in this is a Bane Lich that is carrying around part of the essence of Bane. I thought that was awesome. You can actually go and look up the statistics for a Bane Lich. Because it was second edition, of course, they had Thaco, which was the number you needed to hit armor class 0, and then you adjusted that based on the armor class of the creature you were attacking. It was a whole other system. I really love the fact that they actually used creatures, Dark Stalkers, all creatures that were found within the Dungeons & Dragons game setting at the time. All in all, Very, very impressed. I did read this back in the day. I'm a fan of Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb. They have a very good writing style. It's descriptive yet simple, and it gets the job done. Now, if you're a fan of modern fantasy, you're probably not going to like this, because this is basically, you're following one set of characters. There's no deviation. It's always revolving around Joel or Holly at any given point. It's linear. You don't really find out much about... you find out a little about the politics in Sigil, not Sigil, but it's kind of there. There's some interesting characters as well, some interesting side characters. I like that they brought back Grift, who is a Sorial wizard that we were first introduced to in Song of the Sorials. I like that there are characters in here that a good dungeon master could incorporate into their game if they wanted to. The ultimate location of the Hand of Bane is pretty disappointing. Not a deal breaker though, because that's just like one chapter, and there is so much good in this book, it's not funny. Finder's Bane, if you can track down a copy, I highly recommend it. I got this at a secondhand bookstore for $3.50. So there you go. This is also a Harper's novel. The Harper's series was a series of books. They were sometimes interconnected, but very rarely, that showcased agents of the Harpers. The Harpers are, of course, the force for good in the Forgotten Realms, although that has been debated by many, many characters. The most famous, of course, being Kelvin Blackstaff Aronson, which I'm now just throwing out names there because I fucking can. But there you go. The Harpers, Forgotten Realms, Finder's Bane, Book 1 in the Lost Gods Trilogy. Cannot recommend this book enough. If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, if you're a fan of 90s fantasy, if you're a fan of just a good adventure story. If you liked, hit like. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe. If you got something to say, say it in the comments. Otherwise, go and read a fucking book, people.